Menendez brothers Reddit discussions. Leslie's closing arguments. I noticed she made a few digs at Lyle in the closing arguments. Sure, Eric is her client, not Lyle, but I struggle to imagine Eric being okay with Leslie saying, "Do not punish Eric for the mistakes of his brother, he was punished for Lyle's mistakes all his childhood." I think it was the other way around. Lyle was the one taking the blame for Eric willingly many times. Eric himself said so. So it just confused me and slightly annoyed me. It kinda made it sound like Lyle was the one deciding to kill the parents and Eric was just going along. But both brothers have said Lyle was willing to try out other options first, running away, police, relatives, but Eric was shutting down all those options.
I noticed that too. Eric is drawn to women who do not like Lyle. I just never dared to say it out loud.
Oh, I've noticed that too. I don't think she liked him very much. As a person, I think she liked him fine, and for making Eric happy, I think she liked him. But I think she saw him as someone who made her client's case harder, that being associated with Lyle was part of Eric's legal problem. And in that way, I think she did not like him. And I think she made that clear several ways, and I would guess he probably frustrated her with his refusal to go along with that idea. I think she would have preferred Eric to allow for some more distance between him and Lyle. Eric has an interesting way of loving women who do not like Lyle and somehow separating that out and managing to love them both. I don't know how he does it. In 3 different ways, Kitty, Leslie, and Tammy are women Eric loved who did not like Lyle. And he's never chosen any of them over Lyle. He always chooses Lyle. But he loves them.
Leslie is a control freak and Lyle is as well. They most definitely butted heads. Lyle is difficult to control, he was doing all kinds of dumb stunts by himself. So he was probably frustrating her to no end. But I do think that she liked him, especially in relation to Eric. That was his big brother. Lol. Not Eric loving women that dislike Lyle. That made me laugh. He really is making Lyle's life difficult. Haha.
You really think Lyle is a control freak? Face with tears of joy, face with tears of joy. I am a control freak, but he doesn't look like he is one. I mean, he definitely likes to control things, but not to a freaky level, but obviously I can't know for sure.
In jail, he spent hours cleaning his cell to make it shine and be more livable. He called reporters at their hotel rooms from jail to try to tell them his and Eric's side of the story. He asked Norma to record footage of trial coverage so he could see what the public thought of him and their case. When Eric messed up about the Big Five on the stand, Lyle called around to stores to try and fix it for him. I think he was a bit of a control freak, and it's okay to admit that. I kind of am too.
He is such a mother hen. I also wonder if his need for control and to clean is also a reaction to Kitty? She kept her house dirty, rubbed Lila's face in his soiled sheets, and punished him by putting him under the bed with the pee and feces of all their ferrets for hours. Kitty was described as someone who was wild, unpredictable, and no control whatsoever, which scared Lyle. LOL, he's also trying to fix his radio, a real handyman. I always loved that story about Buffy, too. I think he also had a pet lizard in prison as well. He reminds me of that old man in Shawshank Redemption with a pet rat.
Well, didn't she also say in some post-conviction late-night show interview that I defended the one who didn't reload his shotgun and shot his mother in the face? I agree that it was unnecessary, but maybe she really believed they would get separate convictions.
I think Lyle had a very good reason in writing that 17-page letter to Eric. He feared Leslie would try to turn Eric against him. Lyle was justified in his fears.
Well, what we know at the time is that the lawyers were trying to pressure him to go with the abuse disclosure. But I agree that in the letter you can sort of see, well, Lyle emphasized a lot how important it is that they not betray each other. Out of context, it's obviously hard to know. But I can see how those would be operating as hints that, hey, just in case she's whispering in your ear that you would be better off, please don't do that.
She was trying. It was obvious. Because the moment she got involved with the case, she insisted that Eric should be moved to another section of the jail. I'm not sure if that's what Eric wanted or what Leslie wanted. And also, I'm of the opinion that Leslie fucked up in the second trial big time. Leslie is a smart woman, but she is a control freak. And that story with Vickery discredited her very badly.
I think it's pretty safe to say that's what Leslie wanted. Eric never wants to be separated from his brother. Otto, I don't remember, but it's possible she had him move to a psych area, which is definitely where he needed to be.
What story with Vickery?
In the first trial, Vickery redacted his notes about Eric, for example, took out things indicating he hated his parents, wanted them dead before the murders, the sexually abused by a male babysitter, really Lyle, at 5 years old reference, all references to consensual same-sex sex at 11 to 12 and 16, the lie Eric said about Jose's male lover telling the brothers Jose was going to kill them, at Leslie's behest. How that actually occurred is disputed between the two. For example, she says she just told him to black marker out things already ruled inadmissible. He says if he didn't edit them, as in taking things right out / rewriting, she wouldn't let him testify. They sent the edited notes to the prosecution. In the second trial, her firm accidentally sent the original unedited notes to the prosecution's expert witness, Dr. Park Dietz, which resulted in the prosecution getting them as well.
But anyway, like Lyle said, they couldn't really turn on each other because they both shot their parents. They were both equally involved. Unless they make the argument that Lyle said, "It's starting now," and that instigated it all, or that it was his idea to buy the guns, or Lyle's defense stresses that Eric refused other options. But ultimately, as far as we know, they both went into that room and there was no one standing there idle, and they didn't try to stop each other in the moment.
Yeah, at the very least, I think they should have switched it and had Jill running the defense. I like Jill better. Lots of people did, and it helps.
But you mentioned that not even Jill recognized the gravity of Kitty's sexual abuse.
I'm not sure if it's a question of recognizing or if it's a question of knowing what the jury will respond well to. And I think that is less of a problem for their legal case than, say, how much the judge hated Leslie. I think the judge was pretty big-time misogynistic about Leslie, calling her too emotional and overly sensitive, etc. But whether or not it's fair, I think Leslie's dynamic with him did nobody any good, and actually did some harm.
No, I just mean that just in general few people really recognize that what Lyle went through was wrong too. I think Leslie's dynamic with him did nobody any good and actually did some harm. With Lyle, you mean?
TBH, aside from how the brothers came across as spoiled rich brats, I also think how Leslie came across hurt their case, as well as people thinking she made up the abuse excuse based on her past case. Reminds me of that bedtime story, The Boy Who Cried Wolf. Having Vickery redact his notes, only for it to be revealed, was also detrimental. Of course, we all know Lyle's part as well.
Leslie has a very brash and forceful personality. Some people like it while some people hate it. I am sure that it had more of a negative effect on the male jurors.
I also don't understand why she did that. There was no need to throw Lyle under the bus in the name of representing Eric. After all, Lyle wanted to protect his brother, and this is why he ended up in jail. It was a very cheap shot.
Exactly. Especially because I do not remember Jill ever making any digs at Eric to save Lyle. And she could have made those digs. Eric was not perfect by any means. I usually like Leslie, but I was giving her the side eye whenever she threw Lyle under the bus that way.
The only dig I recall Jill making in her closing, and it wasn't really a dig, but she just put a question to Lyle's jury as to why Eric had to change his pants, but Lyle only his shoes if Eric was supposedly shooting from a distance. She asks it in kind of a pensive tone, probably to put a bit of doubt in Lyle's jury's minds as to how much Lyle perhaps covered for Eric with respect to what went on in that room. That was my take from it anyway. It was most likely just a tactic, similar to what Leslie was doing, but Leslie went harder for sure. Also remember that Lyle's jury didn't hear what Leslie said, so it didn't affect him, and vice versa.
She should have concentrated on her argument. She should have argued as to based on what factors should the jury give him a non-guilty verdict or manslaughter. She shouldn't have said, "Please don't give my client a long sentence because his brother is the bad guy." That's not an argument. That was really very cheap.
That's why, as much as I appreciate Leslie, I'm not a fan of hers, people calling her queen or empress, whatever.
Honestly, I just think she is annoying. I appreciate but dislike her.
Lyle made more mistakes. Lyle is harder in terms of a legal case to defend. There was a chance that being tied to Lyle could make Eric suffer more, and I think Leslie was desperate to spare Eric more suffering. So she was saying, even if you think the punishment should be harsh because of X thing Lyle did, please don't make my client suffer. Please see him as separate from his brother. She was also worried, reasonably enough, that Eric would be tainted with guilt for things that he didn't do. I'm not arguing about Lyle's actions. I'm saying that this would be legal perspective.
There were a few moments in Leslie's closing that gave me pause. Particularly when she was talking about Lyle's actions overtaking the trial and how Eric was always in the shadow of him. I was like, Leslie, you've presented far more witnesses defending Eric than Lyle. You had 3 psychological experts, please stop. Also, it's poor form because Jill never threw Eric under the bus and she could have easily. Eric went into the first. Eric put Lyle's life in danger, not once but twice with Ozil and Craig. Then she also implied that Eric had a worse relationship with Kitty, which is simply not true at all. I like Leslie, but it seems like in order to get her client a better verdict she had to sacrifice his brother. Which seems to be a theme for Lyle all the time.
She also asked leading questions to Eric about Lyle protecting him as a child, so she helped his defense too.
Ugh, I hate this. Leslie would be stupid to not cleverly phrase her arguments in a way that makes the jury place a little more blame on Lyle than Eric. They are Eric's jury. Now if she had done this in front of Lyle's jury, then, yes, I would have a problem with it. But her doing this has no negative impact on Lyle. And can only benefit Eric. I assume you're talking about her quote, "I don't want Eric to be taking the rap for Lyle," where she basically talks about how Lyle did things she doesn't want to negatively affect the jury's perception of Eric. Whether or not it happened, it's Lyle who Ozil claims threatened him. It was Lyle who organized the erasure of the will. And it was these things that the prosecution tried to involve Eric in. For example, bringing in Detective Valentine, who lied about Eric going into computer stores. It's literally Leslie's job to make sure Eric is being judged for Eric's actions. It's the prosecution's fault for trying to make the brothers one person and having them both be responsible for actions only taken by one. As for Leslie saying Eric suffered for being Lyle's younger brother, I'm sorry, but at times she's absolutely right. And she gives examples. Only once using an example of an action taken by Lyle, the coxa by Lyle on Eric. After that, she immediately follows it by saying, "I don't bring that up as a judgment against Lyle." The other things are examples like Jose making Eric take the fall for the robberies. This was probably done to inspire protective instincts in jurors. Leslie also made a very good point in her argument about why she doesn't want Eric's jury to consider Lyle's actions too much, which you elected to ignore, is the fact that Eric's jury wasn't privy to any of Lyle's psychological experts. This is literally so important that Leslie made that clear. Eric's jury had to hear about all of Lyle's actions and yet wasn't allowed to hear his experts clarify and explain these actions. So naturally she doesn't want to think too much on Luke's actions when they haven't had all the information. It's so frustrating to see so many people fall into the Norma Novelli theory that Leslie was trying to turn Eric against Lyle when there's really no evidence. Only evidence to the contrary, actually.
Eric has a better shot at arguing imperfect self-defense because the threat to Eric was more clear and open. I'm just thinking from a perspective of what you could tell a jury: the fact that, "Go to your room," an explicit cue for rape, the fact that Eric had been threatened with a knife the last time he tried to say no, the fact that Jose regularly made threats of violence and then fulfilled them. It would make an impression on the jury. That story of the threat Jose made about screaming and what he did when Eric screamed. An explicit threat has been made against Eric sometime that week, in fact, after Lyle spoke to Jose. Jose was a terrifying person. I completely believe that Lyle felt under threat, and I believe that Jose Wood was a danger to him. I also understand some of the cues that Lyle was receiving, and that Jose threatened to kill him when he was 12. But if you're going for imperfect self-defense, the presence of a clear threat is helpful. Something that the jury can understand. And the threat to Eric is clearer. More standard. A problem with this whole case was how much it deviated from the standard and people couldn't wrap their minds around it. Dot.
I don't know. If that was the only argument left to save Eric, then Eric's chances were also very slim.